Netanyahu has been adding new stipulations. So he was saying that he wasn't hardening Israel's negotiating stance, its like bargaining position, but behind the scenes, he was actually adding different stipulations to ceasefire proposals that were kind of throwing the negotiators and the mediators and stuff sort of off balance and making a ceasefire less likely. It seems like he's doing that because the continuation of his government depends on it, because he has some far-right forces in his government who say they'll collapse the government if there is a ceasefire.
I had Josh Landis on the podcast, and he said, a while ago now, a couple of weeks ago, Iran, there's a lot of reasons not to retaliate. I mean, they've got to, not at some level want to retaliate because aside from the kind of feeling that they have to demonstrate their retaliatory capacity and look tough in the region, it's all downside. There are lots of reasons just to let Israel pursue its present path, which isn't working out well for Israel, and not interrupt your enemy when you're making mistakes. So I'm not shocked that Iran still hasn't retaliated. But you'd think, the experts say that if the hostage negotiations don't work out, if the ceasefire negotiation doesn't work out, and it looks like it's not gonna, and Iran can't kind of claim they got that war-ending deal instead of retaliation, it seems like there's still a lot of pressure on Iran to retaliate. And it's not that easy to imagine, given the way they retaliated last time, which was with non-trivial military force that was fairly ineffectual, arguably because they wanted to kind of tip Israel off and it not be too ineffectual. I don't know. But given that that's where they're starting from, it's not that easy to imagine a retaliation that's not of a magnitude that risks wider war. But who knows?
Right. Yeah. Like the kind of strategic logic involved here would seem to necessitate an attack on a grander scale than that. They already kind of broke the taboo against directly attacking Israel, and they must feel that they have to go beyond that. The Landis point was interesting. In last week's Earthling, we had a transcript excerpt in which he was talking about this. It's kind of Napoleon's dictum, I guess, not to interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake or something. And then people should go watch the whole episode. I thought that his explanation kind of underplayed just the role of American deterrence here. We expanded our military footprint in anticipation of a possible attack. I think Iran they probably do have the strategic consideration in mind that Landis mentioned. I also think they're just scared of the United States and of Israel because a war could go very badly for them. Should we talk in a little bit more detail about the ways that Israel is an out of control client state? Because the ceasefire agreement that you're mentioning, that people are starting to think, and Iran has hinted, and the White House certainly seems to think, that a new reason to urgently get to a ceasefire is that'll make it so Hezbollah and Iran don't attack Israel. One thing we learned, and there has been reporting on this in Israeli media, but the New York Times did some reporting on how Netanyahu has been adding new stipulations. So he was saying that he wasn't hardening Israel's negotiating stance, its like bargaining position, but behind the scenes, he was actually adding different stipulations to ceasefire proposals that were kind of throwing the negotiators and the mediators and stuff sort of off balance and making a ceasefire less likely. It seems like he's doing that because the continuation of his government depends on it, because he has some far-right forces in his government who say they'll collapse the government if there is a ceasefire.
Plus, as long as there's a war, apparently he gets to stay in power. That was at least what people have been saying from the beginning, is that, after October 7th, okay, Netanyahu's to blame for this, and he will have to lose his job, but not until the war is over. And so that in itself gives him an incentive for war to just continue. And there's now serious talk of Israel launching a preemptive kind of war against Hezbollah. There's already kind of robust exchange between the two, but there's talk about escalation on that front. So as a political matter, um, leaving aside what the far right part of his coalition is demanding, it seems to me it's probably in his interest to just keep wars going as long as possible.
Yeah, they were also saying, they were considering a preemptive strike against Iran, and apparently a majority of Israelis supported that idea, or something like close to 50% maybe. I thought it was sort of darkly humorous. It kind of reminded me of how people talk about Iran's nuclear program and supposed desire to seek nuclear weapons, because we don't actually have evidence that they want to do that. It's just kind of an inference. We're like, well, they're surrounded by us. We're really threatening to them. Presumably, they would want a nuclear weapon in this situation. And I think it is kind of similar in this case. It's like Israel attacks, I guess you can't say they attacked Iran, but they attacked inside Iran, in Tehran, the capital.
Yeah.
And then they immediately think, oh, Iran will probably want to respond to this. We need to preemptively attack them to defend ourselves. The other Israel issue that we write about in the newsletter is there is some Haaretz reporting about this. That's an Israeli newspaper. There had earlier been some reporting by Al Jazeera about this, but I didn't know about it. And apparently Israeli forces, with the knowledge of like high-ranking military officials and commanders, they have been kind of dressing up detainees, including civilians.
Mm-hmm.
In one case, as young as 16 years old, they've been dressing them up in IDF uniforms and sending them out with their hands bound to test Hamas-controlled structures and tunnels and stuff for booby traps and to see if there's armed militants there. There have been cases where there were armed militants who, shoot the detainee, and the Israeli forces know, okay, there's Hamas there. This is a particularly kind of gross and disturbing form of human shields. We usually hear that in reference to Hamas, but this definitely seems to count.
Yeah, and it's different.
Crime.
I mean, Hamas is accused of doing it in a more kind of aggregate way, just having their forces stationed amid civilian populations, which is a pretty predictable thing. That's the way it's going to work in a situation like that, where you can't have military bases. You're going to be in cities and population centers. Now, I mean, the accusation is they go further and locate specifically in hospitals. But yeah, this is different. This is more retail than wholesale, I guess you could say. But if that's not too gross a way to put it, but Haaretz is it's kind of the New York Times of Israel. So this is a little different from first of all from Al Jazeera reporting it from an Israeli point of view. Although I'm sure there are Israelis who, just as Americans are skeptical of the liberal elite New York Times, are skeptical of Haaretz, but it seems like a pretty well documented report. It made it sound like a widespread and accepted practice that top Israeli officials knew about. It's not good.
And Haaretz a month ago, in early July, I think it was, they had a really good report that people should read about how Netanyahu has been kind of subtly behind the scenes sabotaging ceasefire proposals by selectively leaking certain information to gin up opposition to any potential ceasefire, and making it seem like Hamas's response to Israeli proposals was more negative than it actually was, so that he could blame Hamas for obstructing the process.